Hey, welcome to Relatable, Relationships Unfiltered. Healthy relationships are not a coincidence. They are not because someone is just lucky or just happened to find the perfect fit. Healthy relationships are the result of each person making a conscious decision to show up better. Joining me today is Dr. Lori Husband, a clinical psychologist. She's here to help us unpack the idea of mutuality in relationships and why it is so important. This is Relatable, Relationships Unfiltered. Dr. Lori, welcome to Relatable.
Thank you so much, Liz. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited to have you. We have been connected for quite some time and finally were able to make this happen. So I appreciate your patience with me and I'm so excited to chat. Tell
Yes.
everyone who you are and what you specialize in.
Sure. So I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm out of Nashville, Tennessee, and I specialize in modern dating and relationships and breakups.
How did you get into the work that you do? Was it the result of kind of your story, your experience, or what drove you there?
That's right. I did not start out with that specialty. I actually started out working in trauma. But yes, I was single and dating for much of my 30s and into my 40s. So I had a lot of experience with dating, and I found it hard. I couldn't quite find the resources out there that there are now. And so that is something I really love working with, is just helping people navigate, how do we do online dating? It's changed so rapidly in the last decade. How do we figure out how to sort through these apps? It's so kind of like consumerism. It's like
Right.
shopping. And so, yeah, how do we just adapt to that medium? I also find that there's not as many resources on breakups. Whenever I have a client going through a breakup, it's just not something our society has really set up to teach us. How do we do that well?
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's true because there's so much stigma and shame and judgment
Mhm.
and looking at breakups as a failure or somebody
Mhm.
did something wrong if you broke up versus like the decision that maybe this relationship just isn't working for us anymore, isn't serving us.
Mhm.
So I agree that there is not a lot of good information around breakups
Mhm.
and also not a lot of just like support. It just seems like there's just so
Mhm.
much generic information out there around it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was talking to my husband about that. Like, how when, we lose someone, say, through death, there's a lot of, societal support. You get time off work, you have, rituals. But I mean, he said, like, when he was going through a breakup, what do you do in corporate America? What do you tell your boss? Like, I'm heartbroken. I need time off. So,
Right. Which is like, anyone who's been through it, which is probably most of us, knows like
mhm.
how painful it is. And it does feel like, how am I going to get through the day? So,
Yeah.
yes, that's
Mhm.
um, in terms of what we're going to explore today, which I think that will definitely lead to some of the breakup conversation, because
Mhm.
I think that this becomes a really big barrier in a lot of relationships. But
Mhm.
the idea of reciprocity, of mutuality, of a relationship being each person being willing to give and receive. And I
Mhm.
see it happens a lot that often somebody has a really hard time with one or the other. And these are the
Mhm.
people we end up seeing get in relationship with each other, right? Because that's the
Yes.
dynamic that makes sense. But how would you even like describe the idea of mutuality in a relationship?
That's a good question. I would I would think of it as mutual effort. So people giving sort of mirroring the effort, in terms of emotional effort, but logistical effort, um, and also being emotionally open. So a sort of equal amount of willingness to take risks. Intimacy is an interpersonal vulnerability. And so, I think when we're dating and when we're available and open, we we would want someone who matches that. But you're right. We tend to see with different attachment styles that sometimes somebody's very open and available, and they find themselves with somebody who's not willing to do that, not willing to be vulnerable, or not willing to give the effort.
Yes, and
Mhm.
the term that I, have developed around that of our relationship programming, and that when that has been our norm,
Mhm.
so that has just been the environment, that is how we're used to being treated throughout our upbringing, really what was instilled in us. It makes sense that that's what feels familiar, that's what we're going
Mhm.
to seek out, that's truly what we are drawn to. And I think that
Mhm.
that's where this gets so complicated, whether you're either in the dating scene or you've been in a relationship for a while, is that a lot of people are just seeing themselves and the relationship and their partner through one lens, and it's the
Mhm.
lens of their relationship programming. And
Right.
when they are not able to step out of that, this
Mhm.
idea of mutuality, I think, really gets lost because it's defined differently for each person based on their lens. It looks different. The expectations
Mhm.
look different. But I think it often leads to, like, one of the biggest sources of conflict in a
Mhm.
dynamic, because someone is often not feeling like the priority and the other person's often feeling like they're never good enough, and the
Mhm.
dance just goes back and forth.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I mean, I think I tend to see like resentment build up, that especially if you've been in a relationship for a while, it takes work, it takes effort.
Yep.
And so if one person is really tending to that or seeking it and the other person is just going through the motions of daily life, then yeah, you tend to see it just sadly sort of a prolonged disconnection and resentment build up.
What do you usually see with your clients as the source of, that the either the difference in the expectations, the
Mhm.
difference, and of course attachment styles, we know that for sure, but in terms of, one person really wanting to put in these efforts and then they inevitably are drawn to the
Mhm.
person who doesn't, or who says they want to, but their actions are rarely in alignment.
Mhm.
And then that person who doesn't necessarily actually want to put in the work, even if they're telling themselves, even if they're telling everyone around them they want to, they're not putting in
Mhm.
the work. Yet they're drawn to the individual who's
Mhm.
putting in the work and telling them, like really giving
Mhm.
them a lot of shit about it.
Right.
What do you
Mhm.
see as kind of like how people end up in that pattern?
Mhm. I mean, I see a couple different patterns. So I think in long-term relationships or marriages or just people who've been living together a while, I think sometimes we just don't know. I think we don't get that kind of education, or you just maybe you didn't see it in your family growing up. And so sometimes it's somebody's maybe complacent, or they don't see a problem until their partner is ready to leave, or is so disconnected or saying, let's go to couples therapy. It takes a big wake up call for them to realize it. Maybe they're getting their needs met and they're fine,
Yeah.
or they're just not hearing sort of the urgency of the partner saying, I need more. So I see that as a pattern where it's really no one's fault. It's just no one's intervened early enough.
Yeah.
Um, and then I mean, I was definitely in this situation myself dating, and I see this a lot in dating is that we can get caught in a cycle where we're maybe attracted to somebody who's unavailable. It feels you get kind of the dopamine of the unpredictability. You don't know when they're going to text, if they are, and that is
Totally.
kind of exciting. And so you get on this cycle of like, this feels really good. This feels like we're meant to be because I'm so excited and nervous. And
Yes.
yeah,
Which is
so mhm,
so common in terms of then feeling like, because again, going back to your programming, so it's
mhm,
familiar, so it feels
yeah,
like the norm, so it feels right, though
mhm,
oh so wrong. But there's
yeah,
this, part of you that is like, this just feels like the right fit. This just feels,
mhm,
we are made for each other. And it's like, well, you are
mhm,
made for each other because you are like reminiscing and you're like perpetuating these fucked up foundations that, you know, put you there to begin with. And that's why it feels like you're made for each other, because your trauma is truly doing a dance together that feels so connecting.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you that I think that is so common to be drawn to that. That is an awareness that I have had for myself. You know, I've been divorced about 4 years and haven't been in anything long-term serious since then, but have certainly dated a couple people throughout that time. And each time I'm like, okay, you know, I have this new awareness from the last situation of how my trauma is showing up and how my attachment style is showing up. But so then you think you're going into it like so enlightened and, you know, this time is going to be so different, just to find out that there's this other aspect that like hadn't been brought to light yet. And that has been one of my awarenesses recently, is that and I've known that I definitely am drawn to the avoidant, to the emotionally unavailable, which is certainly not doing me any favors. But as you're describing, when men feel safe, or they are attentive, they are affectionate, I certainly have to really be intentional in allowing myself to sit with that and receive it, because that is not, that's not what I'm drawn to.
Yeah, no, I feel yeah. I mean, I can share. Yeah, I met my husband. So I've been married twice, and I met my current husband during COVID. And I think it took something very dramatic, like, you know, the world changing. And, you know, he was very available and very attentive and very open, and, wanted to do things for me, bring me flowers. And I was actually kind of turned off. I was like, what's wrong with you? Like, why do you like me so much? Like, this is
Totally.
a turn off. Yeah.
Yes,
And
because it's so foreign.
yes, it is. It can feel like a turn off to have a man who's truly emotionally available. I mean, which you have to distinguish that from like love bombing, of course.
Of course.
But yeah, I think it took, luckily, he was secure enough and mature enough to work with me on that, and hold that space when I would push him away and be like, oh.
Yes. And that really is the pattern. Like, that awareness is so important, that we get so stuck in this identity of what our role is in a relationship. And so if our role is that we're constantly in dynamics where we have to beg for this attention, we have to beg for the text back, we have to beg for the mutuality, that so much becomes like, this is just who I am. This is my role in a relationship. And so when we then do step out of our comfort zone a little bit, and the other millions, billions of people that are not going to make you beg, that are happy to give you time and attention, because that is our identity, is the one to be asking for it when we don't have to ask for it. It's really confusing. And as you're saying, often leads to even that ick, right? The ick of like, I can't be attracted to you because you're not eliciting this dopamine gain for me of the slot machine.
Yes. And I would, yes, for sure. And I would just say, yeah, I think it is, once you get off the dopamine cycle, it's so much better. I mean, he and I talk about that. I mean, lucky him being married to a therapist, but we talk about like, the dopamine high is so kind of up and down. And once you get into a safe relationship, it's not as exciting as, like somebody who's totally unavailable, but you continue growing and it gets just more exciting over time, deeper. And yeah.
And part of your healing of that is that you're allowing yourself to give time for adaptation. So for your nervous system to stop like needing or craving those highs and lows so much that you've been wired for, that you've been programmed for. But I really think that that's when we are able to show up with mutuality, because a lot of times in these cycles, the ups and downs of them, the conflict, the repeated breakups, all you're doing is putting out fires. right?
Yeah.
So it is just
Mhm.
constant problem solving. And then
Mhm.
maybe you're coming back together and talking through it and like, okay, how can we do it differently next time? But
Mhm.
that rarely actually happens. Or you're not talking about it at all. You're just brushing it under the rug and moving on. But when we are in these cycles of the highs and lows and just not knowing what to expect, that the roller coaster, the odds of us being able to take the relationship to the next
Mhm.
level of the mutuality is
Yes.
nearly impossible because
Mhm.
we're not able to focus on how do we grow together. We're just trying to figure
Mhm.
out how the fuck we don't like rupture
Right.
the whole thing, right? So
Yes.
such a
Mm.
different world.
Oh, I yes, that's so true. So it's hard to progress as a couple, right? Yeah, how do you even set goals and make plans if you're just trying
Yes.
to not have a conflict and try to, go on vacation and not, burn it all down. But also personally, you cannot grow. You can't, I see people really stuck. You can't really grow in your career and in your personal life as much when you're living in that chaotic cycle.
And especially, I
Yeah.
love that point of it because, especially thinking about the toll it is taking on your nervous system, that if
Mhm.
you don't know what's going to happen that day, you don't know, what the conflict is going to be about, you don't know at what time
Mhm.
of day the conflict's going to start, you
Yeah.
are just constantly on guard. And whether it's on a conscious level or not, your nervous system knows that
Mhm.
this isn't safe, this isn't secure, there's no stability. So to your point, we rarely then can focus on our growth in other areas or invest that
Mhm.
emotional energy that is needed for personal growth because we are just guarded and ready to either fight or
Mhm.
flight at all times.
Right.
It,
Yeah.
it takes a toll.
It takes a toll. Oh, yeah, definitely. It takes a toll on your health. I just see people get stuck. Yeah. And so
Yes. When you're dating, so even
Mhm.
going back to your experience,
Mhm.
how how do you help people, or how did you help yourself to recognize, okay, this is my pattern? I
Mhm.
tend to either seek out people who don't put in these equal efforts or who don't expect efforts out, you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
there's a certain type of people that they're seeking out. How
Mhm.
do you help people to get clear on that? Let's pause there and then we'll go to the
Right.
next step. Yeah,
Okay.
so how do you bring
Yeah.
awareness to it?
Yeah. I mean, and I wish I had known all this when I was dating.
Right.
There just wasn't it just wasn't out there. I mean, social media or the apps and all the information we have in terms of content. I'm glad that's out there. Because there's now more awareness of attachment styles. So I think that would be the first thing I would do, in working with a client is let's see what your attachment style
Yes.
is. Let's talk a little bit about your first relationships, including with your parents, and see are there commonalities with your caregivers, and then the last few people you've dated, like what are their common qualities. And so, I mean, that insight is the first step. And then I think the next step is then, you know, going on dates and seeing what comes up. And so I do when my clients are ready, I want them to start dating, and so we can talk about are they having the ick and why? Are they feeling very critical or judgmental of others, and is that some of their own stuff going on, or yeah, are they turned off if somebody's open and available? And how I got there, you know, it was just a lot of pain, a lot of
No shit, right?
yeah, a lot
A
of
lot of heartache.
a lot of heartache, a lot of on and on. I mean, I don't know, it took me way too long to learn. Um, I think I think it was partly that I was lucky enough to meet someone who didn't. I mean, was trying to say, like, "Get away," and he was
Right.
like, "No, like, I really like you. Let's, like." I was
Yeah.
lucky enough that he was secure to stick around, so
Well,
mm,
and you must have already been doing some of your work and been on that journey to
yes.
allow him to stick around,
I
right?
was, yes, I was
Because
doing my own work, yeah.
yes, that is what's so common, is that I think that we are often exposed to a lot of people who would be able to show up for us in that way, and a lot of people who are secure and emotionally mature. But
Mhm.
until we bring awareness to what our patterns are and what our
Mhm.
norms are, what our themes are, then even the openness, the willingness to allow that person to even start to inch their way in, I think is
Mhm.
really hard.
It is hard. It really is hard. And I mean, I think some of the biggest insights are I think are about this, like, the spark, the chemistry,
Yes.
the ick, um, is I think a lot of that is that we just need to understand that our brain and our nervous system is not always giving us the good information that, to make that decision. I'm not talking about fear. If you feel fear, you should go with that,
Yeah.
or have a bad gut reaction. But when we think it's supposed to be like like the movies and instant chemistry and love at first sight, that is, that's just not often a good barometer. In fact, if people have that on a first date, I'm usually a little wary.
It's
Yeah.
certainly not sustainable, right? And
Mhm.
there's often a reason why we are having that response. And you're right, our nervous system
Mhm.
is not always so accurate. The amygdala
Yes.
is designed to become aware of perceived threats, right? So it doesn't even
Mhm.
have to be a real threat. The brain is constantly filtering and constantly trying to make sense of all of this information based on our previous experiences. Though it doesn't really
Mhm.
have at least the emotional portion of our brain really doesn't have what it needs to give us that accurate or realistic
Mhm.
feelings in our body or awareness around
Right.
it at those
Mhm.
times.
Yep.
So I
Mhm.
agree that, if it is
Mhm.
fear, of course, let's be aware of that. But a lot
Mhm.
of times what I see happen is that it is just this like nervous energy that we get with
Mhm.
individuals who are familiar to us. And
Yes.
it's not about, it's not this very clear like red flag, no way, no way. Um, but it is just this kind of buzzing we get in our body,
Mhm.
that a lot of us have labeled as chemistry, which can get really
Yes.
confusing.
It is confusing. Yeah. I mean, there's like I don't know if you know the old like social psychology experiment where they would put people like they would have two strangers meet on a bridge, like a suspended bridge way high up. Um, and just when two strangers would meet on the bridge, they would mislabel the fear of heights as attraction. Whereas if they just had people meet, on a just regular road, that didn't happen. So
So interesting, and that really, I
yeah.
guess, ties into kind of like the idea of the trauma bonding in a lot of ways, in the
Mhm,
sense that we tend to be attracted or drawn to in a trauma bonding relationship,
mhm,
drawn to that person that keeps causing you the harm. And I think that part of what going on there, and it's what you're describing, is that when we're put in these scenarios of feeling scared or unsafe, that
mhm,
person there with us is kind of who we align with in that, right? So
mhm.
as you're
Yes.
talking about in the bridge, that would make
Mhm,
sense that they're perceiving that as attraction, because they're like, you're my only
mhm.
you're like human here with me. You're my only option to
Right.
connect with,
Uh-huh.
which I think makes sense in these type of dynamics as well.
Mhm. It does, yeah, and so we can just start to think about that in a different way of like, okay, if I'm feeling really excited and, yeah, really nervous, excited, lots of chemistry sparks, let's just,
Let's
like,
check in on that.
watch that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's and,
Mhm.
when with my clients, when they come in and talk about that, I often have them then just kinda we sit and reflect of, like, what is that feeling in your body reminding you of? Who is it reminding
Mhm.
you of? When have you felt
Right.
this way before? And often they might be able to float back to an ex or to a parent,
Mhm.
and, and also an ex, which ties into what you were saying earlier around tracking those themes, which is
Mhm.
um an activity I do with every client when we're working on relationship reprogramming. Is we do their timeline and then we go back and look at their timeline to track those themes. So
Mhm.
what was the consistency in these people in terms of how they treated you, in terms of how they either showed up for you or didn't? Um, And then when we take that information from childhood of what are these themes? So abandonment, rejection, having to perform for love, those type of things, perfectionism. And then we take it into the romantic relationships. We often can see a lot of similar themes in these people that we're drawn to, whether they are emotionally unavailable, they're avoidant, they're selfish, they're self-focused, they, have a couple priorities in life, and they're not interested in putting time in beyond that. Usually those themes become really clear when we sit down to write it all out.
Oh, yes. I totally agree. And I mean, I love clients to go back through sort of the narrative of their life. We're kind of meaning-making creatures, and so thinking about your relationships, but also the story of your life. It sounds kind of weird to work on that in dating, but it's really helpful to begin to make sense of it. And
Yes.
even writing the story of your last, relationship or breakup can help you kind of connect those dots.
Absolutely. So for
Mhm,
people listening who are
mhm,
either in the dating world or they've been in, a long-term relationship, but they are struggling to either find somebody who they feel fulfilled with, who they feel is meeting their needs, that there is the mutuality in that dynamic, that would be a
mhm,
great first step, right? Like
mhm.
figure out the
Yes.
themes of caregivers of previous romantic partners and really figure out what are the similarities between all of those
Mhm.
people. Because
Yes.
now that gives us a foundation to know this is what we're drawn to. This is what
Mhm,
we're attracted to. This is what we're likely going to tolerate. And then
mhm,
when we take that information, so that's the awareness. So, like,
mhm,
great. But then going into this next step of it is the really implementation of change. So,
mhm.
as you and I know, like
Yeah.
awareness only
Mhm.
gets us so far.
That's
So,
right.
we now have to identify like what needs to change. So, for a lot of us who are maybe drawn to the emotionally unavailable person, the avoidant, the emotionally immature person, we now have to say, okay, that's the theme, which those would all be my themes of
Mhm,
that's unavailable, emotionally
mhm,
immature, struggles with emotional regulation. Okay, so I know that that's what I'm used to. So that's what gives me that sense of chemistry. That is
mhm.
definitely not what I want anymore. So then we, identifying then what are we actually looking for? How do you help
Right.
your clients
Mhm.
to do that? To really like
Yeah.
dig into what they're looking for that isn't on this like vague, broad,
Right.
yeah,
Yes, yes. I always like to do some values work, or values clarification, and then talk to clients about, there is sort of the content of who someone is, right? Like the superficial stuff, what they do for work, or where they live, and we could get so caught on that because of the way the apps are like they're like shopping, and I mean,
right.
so I think it's a fault of the medium. But then to get deeper into what are your values? So what is most important to you? Like, do you have values around Do you have a family? Do you want someone who's kind or who's honest or loyal, or who has have fun together, and just so we would do some values work. Yeah.
Brings a lot of
Mhm,
clarity because when you know what's important to you, then you can
mhm,
know what's important in other people, that you're seeking out to create a partnership with, and
mhm,
yeah, and so I think also pulling your themes into it to say, like, so if these things haven't been working, then what do I actually want? What am I
right,
actually is it true that I want an attentive partner? Is it true that I wanna
mhm,
be in a committed relationship? Is it true are those things accurate, or are they just the story you've been telling yourself because you keep ending up in these other type of relationships that aren't fulfilling? But
mhm,
then when you identify those things, so like you're saying the core values or the opposite of what you've been in relationship with,
mhm.
then the next step is really hard of
It
not
is,
only
yeah.
implementing it, but then allowing yourself like the adaptation phase of
Mhm,
allowing yourself to be uncomfortable, which is exactly what you're describing that you went through early
mhm.
on.
Yes. Yeah, you have to start dating and then see what comes up. That's
Yeah,
good. If you're in therapy, that's good work to do in therapy,
for
is to
sure.
say like, "Oh, I'm like I'm seeing this profile and I'm having this reaction, or I went on this date and, I'm not sure. That's, yeah, really important to start to tease that out. Mhm.
And I think that even for people who are already in a relationship and maybe they want to stay in it, maybe they don't.
Mhm.
Okay, this is a great exercise. Like
Yes.
really figure
Mhm.
out like what hasn't been working for you. What are you wanting in that relationship? And if that partner you're with is, going back to the breakups, if they can't at
Mhm.
all meet you there with the mutuality, they can't meet you there with like the reciprocity of efforts and
Mhm.
intimacy and emotional availability, that's something to consider. But
Mhm.
also for people in relationship, this is a really beautiful opportunity to bring this to your partner and to
Mhm.
say, the work that I've been doing around why are we still in this conflict cycle? Why is there so much
Mhm.
discontentment? And this is what I've realized is that these are my patterns and this is how I'm looking to change and this is what I need from you. Are you open to joining me in that?
Mhm. Absolutely. And you could do that values clarification or creating like a mission statement as a couple, or you could do that values work as a couple and say, okay, are we still on the same page?
Yeah.
And even, have regular check-ins about that just to, I mean, we can't get so caught up in just the grind of daily life that we've got to kind of have something bigger that we're working on.
Right.
Um,
And then having that conversation means that you then have to start actually implementing these changes
yes,
yourself, right? And that's
right.
change really does breed change. And
Mhm,
positive changes in our relationships really invites our partner into positive changes. And so
mhm,
I think part of this adaptation phase, really part of all three steps,
mhm,
is
mhm,
so much honesty with ourselves about
mhm,
we're saying this is what we want, but our actions aligning with our words of saying what we want in a partner. And if we want something out of our partner, if we want them to be emotionally mature and we want them to be present and safe,
mhm.
are we providing that for them?
Absolutely. Yeah. And as often it starts small. It doesn't have to be big, huge
Yes.
changes. I mean, the little things, are kind of the big things. So that can be a place to start, is if very, very small. If you want more connection with your partner, that you just put your phone down and you look at each other in the eye, or you ask them about their day, or you just turn toward them, really small ways.
Yeah, and like you're saying, even the check-ins are
Mhm,
a great tool to start implementing. I really like to encourage my clients to do daily and weekly. So daily just being so brief.
mhm,
My favorite is just asking, is the high and low of your day, the peak, the valley,
mhm. Yeah.
which is can be even if you have kids, that can be a conversation for
Mhm,
everyone. But it's just like a moment of connection, intentional connection, and then the weekly check-ins being longer and a
mhm,
little more elaborate and going deeper. Um, but I agree that it
mhm,
is really figuring out, okay, what are some just small tweaks that we can make so that we are both feeling like
mhm.
we're putting an effort towards it.
Right. And you could, if you're, for listeners who are thinking about that, a question you could just ask yourself is, how do I want to be showing up as a partner? And am I doing that?
I don't think we ask that nearly
Mhm,
enough. We really don't. It is
yeah.
so often when we think about when you're driving in the car, right? And or when you're taking a
Mhm,
shower, when you're getting ready for the day and when your mind is just kind of like swirling. And that's often
mhm,
when we're thinking about whether it's something with our partner or if we're caught up in the conflict cycle. That's what often consumes us. And
mhm.
so frequently, if you are really honest with yourself, y- those
Mhm.
thoughts are all about what the other person is doing or
Yes.
not doing.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
We think we blame. I mean, or we're thinking, yeah, why didn't they do that or ask me that or notice that? And I mean, that's
Yeah.
just kind of our default, is to think about what we're not getting.
Yeah, and it's like,
Mhm.
"Oh, is it really that hard?" Or, "I've asked you a million
Mhm.
times," or,
Yeah.
"How can I be any more clear?" And those are the thoughts that circulate versus stopping to say, "When's the last time I've asked what their need is? When's the last
Right.
time I was
Mhm.
consistent in showing up for that need? Like,
Mhm.
what is my role?" super hard. Like that is
It is hard.
very, I
Yeah.
mean, this is like the next level of all of this. But I think
Mhm.
if your desire is connection and your desire
Mhm.
is mutual efforts towards that connection,
Mhm.
you've got to get clear on your role and your efforts before taking it to your partner.
Mhm. I agree. And I mean, I think if people are dating, I don't know if you have thoughts about this, but like how do you I think about how do you tell if somebody's putting in effort, like the mutual effort, you
Sure.
know? Um,
What do you look for?
yeah, I mean, I think yeah, what do you look for? And I mean, things I think, and I'd love to hear, yeah, what you tell clients is, is the are you matching each other in terms of the amount of communication,
Mhm.
the effort in communication? I mean, you can start to see it really early if you're messaging on an app or texting. Um, uh, effort in planning or, to get together or taking interpersonal risks like, I really like you or yeah, those are some of the things I start to look for.
Yeah, the vulnerability of like,
Yeah.
are they, yeah, willing to open up in the same way that you are?
Mhm.
Same thing that I definitely have, suggest people are looking for. And I was talking to a
Mhm.
client last week and, she had been very clear with this person she's newly dating about a couple relatively simple things that,
Mhm.
she wants in a dynamic. And he, of course, all the words of yes, 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 like would love to do that, but the actions did not align with that. And he was not doing
Mhm.
those things. And I see it commonly in dating is that if they have all of these other things that are like, okay, I could see that they'd be a good fit,
Mhm.
this is where we slowly start to like tolerate the things that are not working. And we look past and we justify and we make
Mhm.
excuses. We start dating for potential at that point
Yes.
versus saying,
Yes.
okay, we're only a few weeks in. I was so clear on X, Y, and
Mhm.
Z. And it's not about that becomes like an ultimatum or this person has to live up to your expectations. That's not what this is
Mhm.
at all. It is that you have certain expectations that you want in a relationship. And early on in dating, if that person is not able to deliver with their actions, that is a good opportunity just to recognize it's not a good fit. Not because
Yes.
there's
Mhm.
anything wrong with them. It's just
Mhm.
the compatibility isn't there.
It's so hard. Yeah, it's so hard, especially when you start to have feelings for someone,
So
it's
true.
really yeah, then it's so hard to then make that decision, and yeah, we kind of rationalize with ourselves. I know, if I tend to be empathic and give people the benefit of the doubt and would say,
Totally.
"Well, yeah, I mean, they had a busy week." Um, I know for me, it's sometimes the circumstances make a difference. Like I was really wanting to have a family, when I was dating. And I think because of that time pressure, I would just really bargain and rationalize, and
Yes.
settle.
Yeah,
And
you
so,
had
yeah.
this other need, right? That
Yeah.
you were
Mhm.
trying to achieve, and no, that makes so much sense. And then
Yeah.
especially, as you're saying, when we start to like
Mhm.
somebody,
Yeah.
when all those toxic butterflies get
Mhm.
wiling out in our bodies,
Mhm.
then we are makes it even harder. I think that's why it is so important to be aware of it early on and try to
Mhm.
remove ourselves early on.
Yeah.
Because yeah, when that chemistry attachment takes hold,
Mhm.
so much harder to
Oh,
move
yeah.
on.
Once
Yes.
you get attached. Yep.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
Well, Lori, thank you so much for being here. Where can everyone find you? Website, social media?
Yes, I am at my website is drlorihusband.com, and it's just at Dr. Lori Husband on Instagram.
All right,
So,
very good.
yeah.
And again, such great
Mhm,
content. So informative. Like it is very clear that you put time and effort into the information you're putting
mhm,
out versus just putting out like buzzwords or clickbait or things like
mhm,
that. It's like your content really is inviting people in to come learn. And I really
mhm.
appreciate that from you.
Thank you so much. Yes, that's my
Absolutely.
goal. It's what I wanted, 10 years ago, but also, yeah, I'm a big nerd and I love
Aren't we both?
to yes, share all the stuff, all the research, and tips.
Yes, because it's
Mhm.
like when you have that knowledge, when you have this awareness, you like,
Mhm.
you just want to, everyone else to have it too. You're like,
Yeah.
here, no, take this. I can help you.
Yes, absolutely.
All
Well,
right.
thank you
Well,
so much. I really
absolutely. Thank
appreciate you
you.
having me on.
We'll talk soon. Thanks.
Okay, bye.
Thanks again, Dr. Lori, for helping us to explore how we can show up better in our relationships. And thank you all for hanging out on Relatable Relationships Unfiltered. Make sure to check out my new book, Relationship Reprogramming, on Amazon, sign up for my newsletter, and find me on Instagram at Dr. Elizabeth Fedrick. This is Relatable Relationships Unfiltered.